The driver kicked the trailer latch loose and let 8 rusted engine blocks slam down onto the cracked concrete of a struggling black single-father's garage, then wiped his hands on his jeans and laughed. CEO says keep the junk. Nobody wants it anymore. What that driver didn't know, what the billion-dollar CEO who signed the order sure didn't know, was that the quiet mechanic standing there in oil-stained coveralls had built those engines with his own 2 hands. And engine number 3 was worth more than her whole company. Before you watch how a forgotten man turned somebody's trash into $5 million, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. And do me a favor, subscribe, because you are not going to believe how this ends. 7:42 on a Monday morning, and Andre Whitmore already knew the day was going to cost him. He knew it the way a man knows weather in his knees. The delivery truck had no business on his street. It was too big, too clean, too corporate for a block where half the storefronts were boarded and the other half were hanging on by their fingernails. It rolled past the pawn shop, past the shuttered diner, and stopped in front of the one building on the row that still had a hand-painted sign out front. Carter Auto Restoration. Andre had kept the old owner's name on the door out of respect. Mr. Carter had given a broke 26-year-old with nowhere to go a job sweeping floors back when nobody else in Asheville would look at him twice. When the old man died, he left Andre the lease the tools and a note that said, "Fix what other people give up on." Andre had read that note every single morning for 4 years. He put his coffee down on the workbench and walked out into the cold. The driver was already climbing down from the cab, clipboard in hand, chewing gum like it owed him money. He looked Andre up and down the coveralls, the worn boots, the gray coming into his beard early the way it does for men who've carried too much too young, and something shifted in the man's face. Andre knew that shift. He'd been reading that shift on white faces his whole life. It was the little recalculation. The "oh, this is who I'm dealing with." "You Carter?" the driver asked. "Carter's dead. I own the shop. Andre Whitmore." "Whatever." The driver held out the clipboard. "Sign here, then initial there." Andre didn't take the pen. "Sign for what?" "For your delivery, chief." The driver jerked his thumb back toward the trailer. "CEO approval confirmed. These are yours now." "I didn't order anything." "Yeah, well, somebody upstairs decided you did." The man was already walking to the back of the trailer, working the latch. "Look, I got 6 more stops. You want the paperwork, or you want me to take it back and let some dispatcher yell at you? Because I promise you, brother, they'll bill you either way." "Brother." Andre let it slide off him. He'd let 1,000 of those slide. When you're a black man running a business in a poor part of town, you learn early which fights are worth your blood pressure. This one wasn't. Not yet. The trailer doors swung open and the driver stepped back. Andre expected junk. Damaged fenders. A pallet of bad alternators somebody wanted off their books for a tax write-off. That's what came to a shop like his other people's mistakes, marked down to nothing. Instead, 8 enormous engine blocks sat chained to the trailer floor. Massive, industrial, wrapped in dust so thick it looked like fur streaked with rust forgotten so long that the shipping labels had gone yellow and brittle. They were the kind of engines that didn't belong in a neighborhood shop. They belonged in a museum, or a racing bay, or a boardroom presentation about the good old days. The driver started unchaining them. "You can keep the whole load. Company doesn't need 'em." He grunted, hauling a ramp into place. "Between you and me, I don't know why they didn't just scrap 'em. Save everybody the trip." Where'd they come from? Some big automotive outfit. Valen, I think it said on the manifest. Andre went very still. He hadn't heard that word spoken out loud in almost 4 years. He'd trained himself not to say it, not to think it. Valen. The name landed in his chest like a fist he'd been waiting on so long he'd almost forgotten to flinch. The driver didn't notice. He was too busy rolling the first block down the ramp on a hydraulic dolly, letting it thud onto the concrete of Andre's floor with a sound like a church bell in a graveyard. One after another they came. 8 of them. They filled his little shop wall to wall, dwarfed his lifts, blocked the light from the front windows. The driver worked fast and careless, the way you handle things you've already decided are worthless. When the last one was down, he slapped the clipboard against Andre's chest again. "Sign, Chief. I got places to be." And this time Andre took the pen. Not because he trusted it, because a man who'd been thrown out of one company on a technicality had learned to keep the paper trail on his side of the fence. He signed. He initialed. He kept his copy and folded it once and put it in his breast pocket. The driver climbed back in his truck, and just before he pulled the door shut, he leaned out and looked around the shop one more time. The cracked floor, the old tools, the black man standing among ruined engines like he'd been handed a pile of tombstones. "Merry Christmas," the driver said, grinning. "Free junk." Then he was gone, and it was quiet, and Andre was alone with 8 ghosts. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he walked to the third engine. He didn't know why the third. Maybe he did. Maybe some part of him had counted them the second they came off the truck and known. He crouched down beside it, pulled a rag out of his back pocket, and started wiping at the block, slow, careful, the way you'd wipe dirt off a headstone to read the name. The dust came away in sheets. Underneath, the metal was still good. Cast beautiful. Somebody had loved this thing once, machined it with a jeweler's patience, and there, stamped into the block just above the crankcase, was a serial number. Andre's hand stopped. He knew that number. He didn't know it the way you know a phone number or an address. He knew it the way you know the sound of your own child crying in the next room. He knew it in his body. He had stamped that number himself with his own hand on a Tuesday afternoon 11 years ago, and he had done it because his supervisor said serial numbers were a formality, and Andre had said, "Not on my engines, they're not my engines, get my mark." His mark. He turned his hand over. There along the side of his palm was an old scar, a thin white line where a lathe had bitten him the same week he'd finished this exact engine. He remembered bleeding on the schematics. He remembered laughing about it with Caleb, the two of them young and stupid, and certain they were about to change the world. "Number 3, Andre whispered. "They kept you." Behind him, small footsteps. "Dad?" He didn't turn around right away. He needed a second to put his face back together. When a man has a daughter, he learns to fold his history up and hide it before she sees it, because a 9-year-old shouldn't have to carry her father's ghosts on top of her own missing mother. "Hey, baby." He stood, tucked the rag away, and turned to face Lila. She was standing into the doorway between the shop and their little apartment in the back, still in her school clothes backpack on one shoulder, staring at the 8 engines with her mouth open. "What are those?" "Delivery. Somebody dropped them off. They're huge." She came closer, running her small hand along the dusty flank of the nearest block, exactly the way she'd seen him do 100 times. She had his hands. Everybody said so. His hands and his stubbornness, and God help her, his mother's eyes. "Can we fix them?" Andre almost laughed. "Can we fix them?" Out of the mouth of a child, the only question that mattered. "You've got homework," he said instead. Add? "Homework first. Then we'll talk about the big scary engines." She rolled her eyes at him, 9 going on 40, and dragged her backpack toward the kitchen table. But at the doorway, she stopped and looked back at the third engine, the one he'd wiped clean, and she said something that put ice down his spine. "That one looks like the drawings you keep in the closet." Andre stood in the middle of his shop and didn't answer, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't break something open. His daughter had never seen those drawings. He kept them in a shoebox on the top shelf behind the winter coats behind the box with her mother's wedding ring in it. He kept them where the past belonged, up high in the dark, out of reach. And somehow she'd looked at a rusted engine block and seen her father's whole hidden life in it anyway. That night, after she was asleep, Andre got the shoebox down. He sat at the kitchen table, under the one good light, and he opened the folder inside, and he spread 11 years of his life across the formica. Schematics in his own careful hand. Torque specs. Combustion diagrams. A photograph of a younger Andre, safety glasses pushed up on his forehead, grinning like the future was a thing you could hold standing next to an older white man in an expensive suit. Gerald Valen, the founder. The man who had once put his arm around Andre Whitmore's shoulders in front of the whole engineering floor and said, "This young man is the best I've ever hired, and I've been doing this 40 years. Andre touched the photograph the way you touch something you're not sure is still real. Then he made a call he hadn't made in 3 years. It rang 4 times. He almost hung up. Then a rough, sleepy voice answered, "Whoever this is, it's midnight and I got work in the morning." "Caleb, it's Andre." Silence. A long one. Andre could hear his old friend sitting up in bed, could practically see him rubbing his face in the dark. "Whitmore, man. Man. You fell off the earth. I called you 100 times. I know. After the funeral, after everything, you dropped everybody. I figured you didn't want to be found." "I didn't." Andre swallowed. "I don't. But I need you to come to my shop tomorrow, in Asheville. I need you to see something, and I need you to tell me I'm not losing my mind." "See what?" Andre looked out through the kitchen doorway into the dark shop where 8 engines sat under a tarp of moonlight. "They gave me the engines, Caleb." "What engines?" "The engines. All 8 of them. Valen dumped them on my doorstep this morning like they were garbage." The line went so quiet, Andre thought the call had dropped. Then in a whisper, Caleb Dawson said the thing Andre had needed to hear from another human being since 7:42 that morning. "That's not possible. Those are locked up in the Heritage Vault. Those never leave the building. Andre, those engines are worth—" "I know what they're worth." "Then why would they—" Caleb stopped. When he spoke again, all the sleep was gone from his voice, replaced by something colder. "Somebody signed those out. Somebody with authority signed 8 priceless engines out of the vault and shipped them to a scrap-tier repair shop with your name on it. Andre, that's not a mistake. Somebody's cleaning house." "I know. I'll be there by 9. Caleb was there by 8. Andre heard the truck before he saw it, heard the door slam, heard boots on his cracked front step. And then his oldest friend was standing in the doorway of his little shop, 17 pounds heavier and grayer than Andre remembered, staring at the 8 engines like a man staring at the dead risen up walking. "My God," Caleb said, "it's really them." He moved through the shop, slowly, reverently touching each block like he was greeting old friends. And he was. These engines had been the best years of both their lives back before everything went wrong. Caleb had wired half of them. Andre had designed all of them. "Number 1, Caleb murmured, reading the serials. "Number 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He stopped, counted again, turned around. "Where's 3? Andre nodded toward the corner where the 3rd engine sat, wiped clean, gleaming dull in the morning light. Caleb walked over to it. He read the serial, and his face went slack. "They kept 3, he whispered. "After everything, they kept 3. Do you know what this is? Do you have any idea what you're looking at?" "I designed it, Caleb. I know exactly what I'm looking at." "No." Caleb turned, and there were tears standing in his eyes, and he wasn't ashamed of them. "You don't. Because you left before it happened. Number 3 won the championship, Andre. 2 years after they pushed you out, they took your design, the one they told the board was worthless, the one you fought Richard Hale over, and they put it in a car, and it won everything. Everything. And they never said your name, not once. They gave the credit to the engineering team, to Hale's people. Your name got erased off the design docs and mine along with it." Andre had known in some vague way. He'd stopped following Valen the way you stop following the weather in a city you had to flee. But hearing it out loud in his own shop from the one man who'd been there, it landed different. "They tried to erase your legacy," Caleb said. "And now they're literally throwing it in the trash and handing it to the one man on Earth who can prove it was his." Andre was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not fixing them for revenge," he finally said. Caleb blinked. "What?" "I know what you're thinking. I know what this looks like. But I'm not doing this to burn anybody down." Andre walked over and put his scarred hand flat against the cold metal of engine number 3. "I'm fixing them because they deserve another chance. Same as everything else that comes through that door. Same as me." Caleb looked at his friend. This stubborn, decent, unbreakable man, who had lost his wife and his career and his good name all in the same terrible year, and who was standing in a broke-down garage in Asheville choosing mercy over rage, and Caleb shook his head slowly. "You're a better man than me, Whitmore." "No," Andre said. "I just got a daughter watching me." They didn't get to keep the peace long. At 9:15 the next morning, a luxury SUV pulled up outside the shop. Black, gleaming, the kind of vehicle that cost more than Andre's building. It parked crooked across two spaces, like the driver had never in her life had to worry about parking. And a woman got out. She was young. Early 30s maybe? Sharp gray suit, sharp heels, hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. She stood on the sidewalk for a second and looked at the front of Carter Auto Restoration, the peeling paint, the barred windows, the neighborhood with an expression Andre had seen 10,000 times. The little curl of the lip, the instinctive step back like poverty might be catching. She came in without knocking. "I'm looking for the owner." "You found him." She looked at Andre, the coveralls, the grease, the dark skin, and once again, Andre watched the recalculation happen behind a stranger's eyes. He was used to it. He'd stopped taking it personally around age 14, mostly. "You're the owner," she said, not a question, a challenge. "Andre Whitmore, and you are Clara Vallon, CEO of Vallon Automotive." She said the name like it should mean something, like it should make him stand up straighter. When it didn't, a flicker of irritation crossed her face. "You received a shipment yesterday, 8 engine units." "I did. There's been a clerical situation. I'm here to formalize the transfer of ownership." She set a leather briefcase on his workbench right on top of his tools, right on top of the note from Mr. Carter, without so much as a glance at what she was crushing, and clicked it open. She pulled out a thick contract and laid it down. "Sign this. It officially releases the company from any claim on the units, their obsolete inventory. This just makes it clean." Andre didn't reach for it. He wiped his hands on a rag, slowly watching her. "You came all the way from where's Vallon headquarters now?" "Charlotte, you drove all the way out here to Asheville, personally the CEO of a billion-dollar company, to get me to sign a piece of paper about 8 engines you say are worthless." Her jaw tightened. "It's due diligence." "Must be some due diligence." Andre glanced at the contract, then back at her. "You always do the intern's paperwork yourself." For just a second, something cracked in Clara Vallon's composure. Because he'd hit the truth, and she knew it, and she hated that a mechanic in a dying neighborhood had seen it. She hadn't driven 3 hours to do paperwork. She'd driven 3 hours because something about this shipment had lodged in her mind like a splinter, and she couldn't stop worrying at it, and she didn't know why. "Just sign the contract, Mr. Whitmore." Andre picked it up. He read it, all of it, every page, every clause, while Clara stood there tapping one expensive heel against his cracked floor, sighing. Checking her phone, making it very clear that his time was worth less than hers. He was a careful reader. He'd learned to be. The last time Andre Whitmore had signed a Vallon document without reading every word, he'd signed away his entire career. So he read. And on page 4, buried in the legal language, he found it. A clause. An odd one. It stated that upon transfer, the buyer permanently assumed all ownership with no further right of investigation, audit, or provenance inquiry by the seller. In plain English, once Andre signed, Vallon could never ask questions about these engines again, never audit them, never trace where they came from or where they'd been. The engines would vanish from the company's records like they'd never existed, and the clause was authorized, signed off right there at the bottom by Richard Hale, Executive Director. Andre knew that name the way you know the name of the man who ruined your life. Richard Hale. The man who'd forced him out. The man who'd stood in a conference room 11 years ago and told the board that Andre Whitmore was not a culture fit. The man who'd made him sign on his worst day 3 weeks after burying his wife a separation agreement that stripped his name off his own designs. And here he was again. Richard Hale quietly authorizing 8 priceless engines to disappear forever into a scrap shop with a clause specifically designed to make sure nobody could ever trace them. Andre understood all at once exactly what he was looking at. This wasn't a clerical error. Somebody was making evidence disappear. And they'd picked his shop precisely because they thought no one would ever look here. Because who would? Who checks the garbage? A poor black man takes off your hands. Clara didn't know. Andre could see that now reading her. She didn't know what she'd signed. She was a young CEO who'd inherited an empire drowning in paperwork, trusting the men her dead father had trusted. She'd approved this transfer as one line item among 1,000, and Hale had counted on exactly that. Andre could have told her right then. He almost did. Instead, he picked up her pen and he signed. He signed because the moment he signed those engines were legally permanently his. And Richard Hale had just made it impossible for the company to ever take them back. Hale, in his arrogance, had built the cage that would trap him and handed the key to the one man he should have feared most. Clara let out a breath. Good. Thank you. That's... She reached for the contract. Andre held on to it a second longer than he needed to. Ms. Valen, he said quietly, are you sure you want to lose engine number 3? She froze. Everything about her went rigid. The bored irritation drained out of her face, and something sharper took its place. Fear, or the beginning of it. What did you say? Engine number 3. Andre nodded toward the corner where the cleaned block gleamed. You dumped 8 engines on me. I'm asking if you're sure about number 3, because that's the one that matters. How do you... She stopped. Started again, and her voice had lost all its polish. The engines don't have numbers. There's no numbering system. They're obsolete inventory. They're junk. They have numbers, Andre said. 1 through 8. I know because I stamped them. For a moment, Clara Valen just stared at him. Then she laughed a short, disbelieving defensive sound. You stamped them. You, a mechanic in... She gestured around the shop, the neighborhood, all of it in this. And there it was. The thing under the thing. The class of it, the color of it. The assumption she didn't even know she was making. A woman raised in a mansion, looking at a man in coveralls, and simply knowing in her bones, the way she'd been raised to know that a man like him could not possibly have built the machines that made her family rich. Andre had spent his whole life being underestimated by people exactly like Clara Valen. In school, when the counselor steered him toward trades instead of the engineering program he'd already tested into. In college, when professors assumed he was the affirmative action seat and not the top of the class. At Valen, when clients would walk right past him to shake hands with the white intern he was training. He knew this feeling the way he knew his own name, so he didn't get angry. He'd learned long ago that anger was a luxury a black man in America paid double for. He just looked at her calm as still water, and he said nothing. He let the silence do the work. He let her stand there in his shop with her question hanging in the air. How does this man know? And he watched it eat at her. Have a good day, Ms. Valen, he said finally. You've got what you came for. She took her contract. She snapped her briefcase shut. She walked out with her chin high, and she got in her SUV, and she sat there in the driver's seat for a full minute before she started the engine, and Andre watched her through the barred window the whole time. She didn't drive away because she was done. She drove away because she didn't have a next move. But he knew the way, he knew weather in his knees that Clara Valen would be back. She came back on Thursday. No contract this time, no briefcase. She parked straighter. She knocked before she came in, which Andre noted. Small thing, but he noted it. Mr. Whitmore. Ms. Valen. He didn't look up from the carburetor he was rebuilding for Mrs. Delacroix down the block, who paid him in cash and homemade preserves, and would never in her life be able to afford what Clara paid for lunch. Shops for repairs. You need something repaired. I need to understand something. That's not a service I offer. She stepped closer around the 8 engines that still dominated his floor. You knew about the numbering. You knew about engine 3. There's no record anywhere in my company of an internal numbering system for the heritage units. I checked. I spent 2 days checking. So either you're guessing or you have information about my company that you shouldn't have, which would be a serious problem for you legally. Andre finally looked up. He set down his tools. He wiped his hands slow, and he looked at this young woman who kept coming back to threaten a man she couldn't figure out. "You want to talk legal problems, Ms. Vallon?" His voice stayed gentle, which somehow made it worse. "You signed a transfer with a clause that erases these engines from your company's records permanently. No audit, no provenance, no questions. You know who wrote that clause?" "You did read your own contract, didn't you?" Her silence told him she hadn't. "Richard Hale wrote it," Andre said. "Executive director, authorized it himself. Now you're a smart woman, so I'll let you do that math on your own time. But you might want to ask yourself why your executive director personally arranged for 8 of the most valuable objects your company owns to vanish into a repair shop in the poorest zip code in Asheville, with a clause specifically designed to make sure nobody could ever trace them again." He watched it land. He watched the young CEO's face change as the splinter in her mind finally drew blood. "That's not," she started. "Richard has run operations for 20 years. He was my father's right hand. He's the reason the company survived the transition after Dad died. He wouldn't he?" She didn't answer. "Ma'am?" Andre picked his tools back up. He was done talking, and he wanted her to feel it. "I don't know you, and you sure don't know me. But you keep driving 3 hours to threaten a mechanic over engines you swore were junk. And a woman with $1 billion and 100 lawyers doesn't do that unless somewhere deep down she already knows they're not." Clara Vallon stood in the middle of Carter Auto Restoration, surrounded by 8 engines her family had thrown away, staring at a black single father in oil-stained coveralls. And for the first time in her adult life, she did not know what to say. From the back doorway, a small voice piped up. "Dad, can I show her?" Andre turned. Lila was standing there, backpack still on, home early from school, holding something in both hands. She'd gone into the closet. She'd taken down the shoebox, and she was holding the photograph, the one of a young Andre in safety glasses, standing next to Gerald Vallon out toward the CEO, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Lila!" Andre started, but it was too late. Clara had already crossed the shop. She took the photograph from the little girl's hands with fingers that had started very slightly to tremble. She looked at the young man in the safety glasses. She looked at the old man beside him. Her father, Gerald Vallon, dead. 10 months, the man she'd give anything to talk to one more time. "That's my dad," Clara whispered. "That's who is this next to him?" "Who?" She looked up. She looked at Andre. She looked at his hands, at the scar running white along the side of his palm, and then she looked back down at the photograph, at the young engineer's hand resting on the workbench, at the identical scar in the identical place. And Clara Vallon made a sound like all the air had left her body at once. "It's you," she said. "The engineer. My father used to talk about there was a man before I ever came into the company, an engineer he said was the best he ever had, and then one day he stopped talking about him. He wouldn't say the name. I asked and he wouldn't." Her voice broke. "It was you." Andre took the photograph gently out of her hands. He looked at it one more time himself at 29, before the world caved in, standing next to a man who genuinely believed in him. Then he set it face down on the workbench. "Your father was a good man, Ms. Vallon," he said quietly. "Better than the people around him. That's usually how it goes. The good ones get surrounded." Clara was staring at him now with completely different eyes. Not the eyes that had walked in on Monday, the ones that saw a neighborhood and a pair of coveralls and made up their whole mind in half a second. Different eyes. The eyes of someone whose entire understanding of the world had just cracked down the middle. "Why are these engines here?" she asked. And it wasn't a threat this time. It was a real question, small and frightened. "If you built them, if my father valued you, why would they be here, and why would anyone send your own engines to you as garbage?" "That," Andre said, "is exactly the right question. And I think you already know you're not going to like the answer." Behind them, engine number 3 sat in the corner, wiped clean, catching the afternoon light. The engine that had won a championship under a stolen name. The engine that held somewhere in its cast-iron heart the proof of everything that had been done to the quiet man now sending a billionaire's daughter home with a shattered picture of the world. Lila slipped her small hand into her father's. "Dad," she said, "is that lady going to be a problem?" Andre looked at Clara. Valen really looked, and for the first time since 7:42 on Monday morning, he wasn't entirely sure of the answer. "I don't know yet, baby," he said honestly. "I don't know yet." Clara left without another word. But she left slower than she came. And at the door, she stopped, and she turned around, and she looked at the 8 engines and the little girl and the man who'd built her family's legacy with his bare hands, only to have it thrown in his face. "I'm going to find out what happened," she said. "To you, to these. I'm going to find out." "Ms. Valen." Andre didn't turn around. "The people who did this to me are the same people who work for you right now. So when you go looking, be careful whose door you knock on, and be even more careful who you tell what you found." She stood there a moment longer. Then she was gone, and the shop was quiet again, and Andre Whitmore stood among the ruins of his own past with his daughter's hand in his, and he understood that the day he'd known would cost him something, had only just begun to send the bill. Clara Valen didn't sleep that Thursday night. She sat in the study of her father's house, her house now, though she still couldn't think of it that way with the photograph she'd photographed on her phone before leaving the shop blown up on the enormous screen mounted over the fireplace. Her father, younger, healthier, alive. And beside him, a black man with safety glasses, pushed up on his forehead, and a smile that hadn't yet learned what the world had in store for it. She'd zoomed in on the scar 3 times. There was no mistaking it, the white line along the side of the palm, the same scar she'd watched Andre Whitmore wipe grease off of that very afternoon. "Who are you?" she said out loud to an empty room. "And what did we do to you?" Because she was starting to understand that "we" was the right word. Not they. Not some abstract past. Her company. Her family. Something had been done to this man by the machine her father built and left to her, and she'd walked into his shop on Monday and treated him like garbage, like something to be signed away and forgotten, and the shame of it sat in her stomach like a swallowed stone. She'd spent her whole life being told the Valen story, the founding in a 2-car garage, the impossible engines, the championships, the empire. It was a story of genius and grit, and her father was the hero of it, and she had never once questioned whose hands had actually built the thing that made them all rich. Now there was a face, and a name, and a scar. At 2 a.m. she opened her laptop and logged into the company's archive system with the CEO credentials she'd inherited and rarely used. She searched Andre Whitmore. Nothing. Not one document. Not a personnel file. Not an email. Not a design credit. A man her father had called the best engineer he'd ever hired, and there was no trace of him anywhere in 20 years of company records. It was as if he'd been surgically removed, as if someone had gone through the archives with a scalpel. Her hands were cold. She searched again. Whitmore. A. Whitmore. Engineer design powertrain. Nothing, nothing, nothing. But you can't delete a man completely. You can only delete him from the places you know to look. And Clara knew one place the scalpel might have missed because it was a place almost nobody had access to her father's private files. The ones on the old server in the basement of headquarters that Gerald Valen had kept walled off from the rest of the company, that even IT couldn't touch, that had come to Clara along with the title and the house and the grief. She hadn't opened them. She'd been afraid to. 10 months her father had been dead, and she still couldn't bring herself to read a man's private thoughts. She closed the laptop. She'd go in the morning, she'd go to the basement, and she'd open her father's files, and she'd find out what the machine she now ran had done to the man in the photograph. But first, before anything, there was someone she needed to talk to. Because there was one man still alive who'd been there for all of it. One man who'd worked beside her father for 20 years, who'd steadied the company after his death, who knew where every skeleton was buried because he'd helped dig half the graves. Richard Hale, the man whose signature was on the claws. Though Clara didn't know that yet. She only knew he was the person who'd have answers, and she was too naive still to understand that the person with all the answers is sometimes the person you should trust least. She called his office at 8 the next morning. "Clara." Richard Hale's voice was warm, as it always was, smooth as aged bourbon. The voice of a man who'd spent 30 years making people feel taken care of, right up until the moment he took everything they had. "To what do I owe the pleasure? You don't usually call this early." "Richard, I need to ask you about something. A name. Andre Whitmore." The pause was very short. Almost nothing. If Clara had been more experienced, more suspicious, she might have caught it. But she wasn't, and she didn't. What she did catch faintly was the sound of a chair creaking, as if a large man had just sat up very straight. "Whitmore," Hale repeated slowly. "Now, where did you hear that name? Does it matter?" "It matters because it's not a name I'd expect the CEO to be asking about out of the blue at 8 in the morning." A soft chuckle meant to sound harmless. "Humor an old man. Where'd you hear it?" Clara hesitated. Some instinct she couldn't name told her not to mention the shop, not to mention the engines, not to give this man the map to Andre Whitmore's front door. She was glad later that she'd listened to it. "I found a photograph in Dad's things," she said, which was true enough. "Him and a young engineer. Someone told me the name was Whitmore. Dad apparently thought very highly of him, so I got curious. But there's nothing in the archives, not a single file. That seems strange for someone Dad supposedly loved." "Ah." Hale's voice softened into the tone people use for delicate subjects. "Yes, Andre. That's a sad story, Clara, and an old one. I'd hoped you'd never have to deal with it." "Deal with what?" "Andre Whitmore was a talented young engineer years ago. Very talented. Your father did think highly of him at first. But the man had problems. Serious ones. He became erratic, unstable. There were, I'll be blunt because you're the CEO and you deserve bluntness. There were allegations. Financial irregularities. Some intellectual property he tried to walk out the door with. It got ugly. We had to let him go, and we scrubbed his records afterward as part of the settlement. Standard practice when a departure is contentious. You seal everything to protect the company from litigation." Clara listened, and something in her recoiled. Not because the story was implausible, it was very plausible, delivered in that warm, reasonable, fatherly voice, but because it didn't fit. It didn't fit the man she'd met. It didn't fit the quiet dignity of the mechanic who read every page of a contract and signed it anyway, and sent her home with a photograph and a warning. Erratic. Unstable. She'd seen unstable men. Andre Whitmore was the most controlled human being she'd encountered in years. "Financial irregularities," she repeated. "Andre Whitmore. I know it's hard to hear. Your father struggled with it too. He'd invested a lot of hope in the young man." A sigh perfectly timed. Why the sudden interest? "Clara, has he contacted you? Because if he has, you need to tell me immediately. The man could be looking for money. People like that, they resurface when they smell a change in leadership. They think a young CEO is an easy mark. People like that." There it was, the same little poison she'd felt in her own chest on Monday and hated herself for. But out of Hale's mouth it was something else. It was practiced. It was a tool. "No," Clara lied. "He hasn't contacted me. I was just curious. Thank you, Richard. That clears it up." "Of course. And Clara, do me a favor. Let this one lie. Some doors, once you open them, you can't close again. Your father knew that. It's why he sealed the whole thing. Leave it sealed, for his sake if not your own." She hung up. And she sat there, and she realized her hands were shaking because Richard Hale had just made a serious mistake. He'd been too smooth, too ready. He'd had a complete story about a man Clara had mentioned only by name, a man whose records had supposedly been erased so thoroughly that even the CEO couldn't find a trace of him, and he'd told that story without a single moment of "let me look into it, or I'd have to check." He knew it cold. He'd had it loaded and ready, like a man who'd rehearsed his alibi so many times, it had worn a groove. And then he'd told her to stop looking. Nothing makes a person look harder than being told to stop. By 10 that morning, Clara was in the basement of Valen headquarters, standing in front of a locked door she'd walked past 100 times and never opened. The server room. Her father's private archive. She'd gotten the key from her father's lawyer months ago and never used it. She used it now. Inside, the air was cold and dry, humming with the sound of machines that had been quietly keeping her father's secrets for 20 years. There was an old workstation in the corner. Her father had been old-fashioned, had liked a real keyboard and a real chair. Clara sat down. She entered the password her father had left sealed in an envelope with his will, a password she'd sworn she'd never need. The files opened, and Clara Valen began to read. She read for 4 hours. She read until her eyes burned and her back ached, and her whole understanding of her family came apart in her hands like wet paper. Because the story Richard Hale had told her was a lie. And her father's private files were the place where the truth had been hiding all along, kept by a man who apparently could not bring himself to destroy the evidence of his own greatest failure. There was no financial irregularity. There were no stolen designs. There was instead a folder labeled simply AW, the thing I should have stopped, and inside it Clara found the real history. Andre Whitmore had joined Valen at 24, a scholarship kid top of his engineering class, hired personally by Gerald Valen over the objections of a board that didn't like the optics of a young black man being handed the crown jewel powertrain program. He'd designed the engines, all 8 of the heritage units, in a span of 6 years. He'd been, by her father's own written account, the most gifted, intuitive engineer I have ever worked with, and possibly the only true genius this company has ever employed. And then it had gone wrong. Not because of Andre, because of what Andre found. There was a memo buried deep, dated 11 years ago. In it, Andre Whitmore, in his own careful handwriting, scanned and saved, had refused to sign off on a disposal contract. The company had been quietly selling decommissioned prototype engines and rare heritage components to private collectors overseas. That in itself wasn't illegal. What was illegal was that the sales were being run off the books, the proceeds funneled through a shell entity, the assets written down to zero on the company's records, so they appeared worthless and then sold for fortunes on the private market. Someone was pocketing the difference, millions of it, and the disposal contracts required an engineer's signature to certify the units as obsolete and without value. Andre had refused to sign. He'd written a memo saying the units were not worthless, that certifying them as such would be fraud, and that he would not put his name to it. The memo was addressed to Gerald Valen, but it had been intercepted, and the man who'd intercepted it, the man who ran the disposal program, the man whose shell company received the money, Clara already knew the name before she read it, Richard Hale. 3 weeks later, Andre's wife had died. Clara found that in the files too, a death certificate, an obituary, a photograph of a beautiful woman named Renata Whitmore, who'd been 31 years old. And in the very worst window of Andre's life, 3 weeks after burying his wife with a newborn daughter at home, Richard Hale had moved. He'd gone to the board with a story, the same story almost word for word that he'd just told Clara on the phone. Erratic, unstable, financial irregularities. And he'd presented Andre with a separation agreement, and a grieving, shattered, exhausted man had signed it, because he didn't have the strength left to fight, because he had a baby to keep alive. Because when the whole world tells you you're worthless often enough, you start to wonder if maybe it's true. The agreement stripped Andre's name from every design he'd ever created. It sealed his records. It contained a non-disparagement clause so aggressive that if Andre ever publicly claimed to have designed the engines, Valen could sue him into oblivion. And it paid him a settlement so small it was an insult enough to make it look legal, not enough to let him fight. Her father had known. That was the part that broke Clara. Gerald Valen had known, and he had let it happen. There was a note near the end of the folder in her father's hand, dated only a year before his death. I let Richard push Andre out because Richard told me the man was a liability, and I was tired and grieving my own losses, and I did not do my job, which was to protect the person who protected this company. I have carried this for 11 years. Andre was right about the disposals. I knew he was right. I did nothing because doing something meant admitting what Richard was, and what I had let him become, and what that made me. I am a coward. I have kept these files because I could not bear to destroy the proof of the one thing I did that I cannot forgive. If anyone ever finds this, if you are reading this, Clara, then know that our fortune is built on a genius we threw away, and the man who threw him away is still in this building, and he is more dangerous than you can imagine. Do not trust Richard Hale. Whatever he tells you, do not trust him. Clara sat in the cold basement and cried. She cried for Andre Whitmore, who'd lost his wife and his life's work in the same terrible month. She cried for the little girl in the shop who'd never known her mother. She cried for her father, who'd been weak when it counted and had spent a decade drowning in it. And she cried a little for herself, for the daughter who'd inherited an empire and only now understood that its foundation was a crime. Then she stopped crying and she got angry, and the anger was clean and clear and useful. She copied every file onto an encrypted drive that never left her body. Because she understood now that she was sitting in a building full of Richard Hale's people, that the man had run operations for 20 years, that he had eyes everywhere, and that the moment he understood what she'd found, he would move against her the way he'd moved against Andre, quietly, patiently, and without mercy. She drove to Asheville that same evening. 3 hours in the dark, breaking every speed limit her father's memory would have scolded her for. She got to the shop at 9. The lights were still on. Through the barred window she could see Andre at the workbench and Lila beside him standing on a stool, both of them bent over engine number 3. He was showing her something, guiding her small hands with his big scarred ones, and the little girl was laughing at something he'd said, and Clara stood on the sidewalk in the dark and watched a kind of wealth that no Valen had ever possessed. She knocked. Andre looked up. When he saw who it was, his face closed. Not hostile, just careful, the face of a man who'd learned that surprises usually cost him. He came to the door. He didn't open it all the way. "It's late, Miss Valen. Lila's got school tomorrow." "I know. I'm sorry. And then Clara Valen, CEO of a billion-dollar company, did something she had never done in front of an employee, or a stranger, or anyone at all. She started to cry again, standing on his front step, and she couldn't stop it. "I know what they did to you. I know all of it. I read my father's files. Andre, I know about Renata. I know about the disposal contracts. I know about Richard. I know what he did to you. And I know my father let him, and I came here to say I'm sorry, and I know that means nothing. I know it's 11 years too late, and I know I walked in here Monday and treated you like garbage, like the trash on that truck, and I—" "Come inside," Andre said quietly. "You're going to wake the whole block." He opened the door. She stepped in, and Lila from her stool looked at the crying woman, and then at her father, and said with the devastating directness of a 9-year-old, "Dad, why is the engine lady sad?" "Grown-up reasons, baby. Go on and get ready for bed." "But, Lila," she went, dragging her feet, casting looks back over her shoulder. When the door to the apartment had closed behind her, Andre turned to Clara. He didn't offer her a seat. There wasn't much to offer, just the shop and the engines and the low light and the two of them. "Say it again," he said. "The part about the files. Slow." So she told him, all of it. Standing in his shop, she laid it out, the empty archives, the phone call to Hale, the too smooth lie, the basement, the folder, the memo he'd written 11 years ago, refusing to certify the fraud, the shell company, the money, the separation agreement, her father's confession. She told him about the note. Do not trust Richard Hale. She told him she'd copied everything, and it was on a drive against her skin right now, and no one else on earth knew she had it. Andre listened without a word. He'd gone very still, the way he had on Monday when the driver said Valen. His jaw worked once. His scarred hand had curled slowly into a fist against the workbench, and he had to consciously open it. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You want to know the worst part?" he finally said. His voice was rough. "I already knew all of it. Every word. I lived it. I've carried it for 11 years, same as your daddy, except I'm the one it happened to. He looked at her. So, what I need to understand, Ms. Vallon, is why you're standing in my shop at 9 at night, telling me my own life story back to me and crying about it. What do you want? It was a fair question and a hard one, and Clara didn't have a clean answer. I don't know, she admitted. I think I wanted you to know that I know. That it's not a secret anymore. That someone in that company finally sees it. I couldn't stand the thought of you thinking every single person named Valen was what was the kind of person who'd throw a man's whole life in the trash to cover a theft. Andre shook his head slowly. Your father was. Richard Hale is. And Monday morning, so were you. The words hit her like a slap, and she took them because they were true. Yes, she said. Monday morning, so was I. I looked at you in this shop in this neighborhood and I decided who you were in about 2 seconds. I've been doing that my whole life without ever once noticing I was doing it. And I was wrong. I was so wrong it makes me sick. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, an ungraceful gesture, the most human thing he'd seen her do. I can't undo Monday. I can't undo 11 years. But I can do something about right now. Hale is still stealing Andre. Those 8 engines on your floor, that was him. He signed them out of the Heritage Vault and dumped them here to disappear, and the clause in that contract you signed proves he wanted them untraceable. He's still running the exact same fraud that he destroyed you for refusing to be part of. And I'm the only one who can stop him. But I can't do it alone. Because the second I move against him inside that company, he'll bury me the way he buried you. And he's had 20 years to get good at it. Andre studied her for a long, long moment. So that's it, he said. You need me. Yes. The engines, my designs, my proof. You need the man you signed away 11 years ago to come save the company that did it to him. Yes? She didn't flinch from it. That at least he had to respect. I need you. And I know exactly how that sounds. I know I have no right to ask. You have every reason to let Hale burn the whole thing down with me inside it, and honestly, Andre, if I were you, I don't know that I wouldn't. Andre walked away from her. He walked over to engine number 3 and put his hand on it the way Clara had watched him do through the window, the way a man touches something that's part of him. You know what Caleb said? He asked, not turning around. My friend, the one who helped me start on these. He looked at these engines sitting in my shop, and he said, Hale tried to erase my legacy. And he's right. That's exactly what this is. 11 years of pretending I don't exist. And then when the evidence got inconvenient, they tried to make it disappear into the one place nobody would ever look, a black man's garage in a poor part of town, because who checks there? He turned around. That's the part I want you to sit with, Ms. Valen. It wasn't an accident that they picked me. It wasn't random. Hale looked at a map of every place he could dump those engines, and he chose here because everything about this place told him it was safe. Poor, black, forgotten, invisible. He was betting my whole life that nobody would ever care what came off that truck. Clara had no answer. There wasn't one. But I'll tell you what I told Caleb. Andre went on, and his voice changed, got quieter, got harder, got certain. I'm not doing this for revenge. If I wanted revenge, I'd have called a reporter Monday afternoon and handed them enough to sink your whole family. I didn't. I signed the paper, and I started cleaning the engines. You know why? Why? Because I've got a daughter in that back room who's going to grow up in a world that already thinks it knows what she is the second it sees her face. And I'm not going to teach her that the answer to being thrown away is to throw somebody else away. I'm not going to teach her that we win by burning things down. She's going to learn something better than that from me, or I've failed at the only job that matters. He looked at Clara steadily. So no, I won't help you get revenge on Richard Hale. Clara's heart sank. But I'll help you tell the truth, Andre said. There's a difference. Revenge is about him. The truth is about everybody he did this to, and everybody he's still doing it to, and everybody he'll do it to next if nobody stops him. I'll help you tell the truth, on one condition. Name it. When this is over, however it ends, my name goes back on my engines. Not for money. Not for a title. I don't want your company. I've got a company." He gestured at the little shop, the peeling paint, the hand-painted sign, and there was no shame in the gesture at all, only pride. "I want my name. I want it on record, permanent, undeniable, that Andre Whitmore designed those 8 engines. So that someday when my daughter is grown, she can look it up and see it in black and white. That her father built something real, and the world tried to steal it, and in the end it couldn't. That's my price." Clara Vallon looked at this man, this stubborn, decent, unbreakable man, standing in a broke-down garage, choosing the truth over vengeance, and his daughter's future over his own vindication, and she understood finally and completely exactly what her father had thrown away 11 years ago. "Done," she said. "Your name goes back. I swear it on my father's grave, which is the only thing left I've got to swear on." Andre nodded slowly. He held out his scarred hand. She took it. And the mechanic and the CEO shook hands in the low light of Carter Auto Restoration, over 8 engines that a thief had thought were buried forever, and neither of them fully understood yet how much it was going to cost to keep that promise. "There's something you should know," Andre said, still holding her hand. "Before we start, something that changes the math." "What?" "You said Hale dumped these engines here to make them disappear, untraceable, no provenance, no audit." Andre's eyes were steady on hers. "But he made a mistake, Ms. Vallon. The same arrogant mistake he's been making for 20 years. He thinks a thing is only worth what he can sell it for. He forgot that these engines carry proof inside them. Serial numbers I stamped. Design signatures machined into the castings, little marks I put in places nobody would find unless they knew to look, because even at 29, some part of me knew I might need to prove these were mine someday." He finally let go of her hand. "Every single one of these 8 engines is a signed confession, Clara. Not mine, his. They prove the heritage units still exist, that they were never destroyed, like the disposal records claim, and that somebody signed them out and tried to make them vanish. That's the whole fraud sitting on my floor wearing my fingerprints and his signature." Clara stared at the 8 engines with entirely new eyes. "He handed you the evidence," she breathed. "He handed me the evidence," Andre agreed. "The man spent 11 years betting my life that I was invisible. And now he's bet his own on it too." For the first time all night, something almost like a smile touched the corner of Andre's mouth. Not warm, not cruel, just the quiet, certain look of a craftsman who's found exactly the flaw that's going to bring the whole rotten structure down. He never once imagined the trash would talk back. From the back room, Lila's voice floated out, sleepy and stubborn. "Dad, you said you'd come say goodnight." "Coming, baby." Andre looked at Clara. "You should get a hotel. Don't drive back tonight, you're in no shape. We start tomorrow. And Ms. Vallon, from here on, you don't call Hale. You don't email anybody at that company. You don't so much as tell your own assistant where you are. Understand? The second he knows you've seen those files, this stops being about engines and starts being about how far a man like that will go to protect himself. And I've already lost one person I loved to Richard Hale. I don't intend to lose anyone else." Clara nodded. At the door, she stopped one more time, and she looked back at him. "Andre, why did you keep the old owner's name on the shop, Carter, if it's yours now?" Andre glanced at the hand-painted sign at the note from Mr. Carter, still tucked under Clara's briefcase where she'd left it Monday without noticing. "Because he gave a thrown-away man a second chance when nobody else would," Andre said. "And I figured the least I could do was make sure his name outlived him." He looked at her steadily. "Turns out, that's all any of this was ever about, Ms. Vallon. Whose name gets to survive, and who gets to decide." He turned and walked back toward his daughter's voice, leaving Clara Vallon standing in the doorway of a small shop that suddenly felt like the most important room in the world. They started the next morning at 6 before the sun, because Andre said the best work always got done before the world woke up to interrupt it. Caleb came at 7. And when Clara Vallon, CEO of Vallon Automotive, worth more money than Caleb Dawson would see in 10 lifetimes, handed him a cup of gas station coffee, and asked what she could do to help. The old engineer looked at Andre like the man had lost his mind. "You told her everything. She read her father's files. She knew before I did." Andre didn't look up from the cylinder head he was inspecting. "She's the one who found out Hale's still running the disposals. She's on our side, Caleb. She's a Valen. I know what she is." Andre finally looked at his old friend. "I also know she drove 3 hours in the dark to stand in my shop and apologize for something she didn't even do and cry about a man she never met. That's more than her father ever did. That's more than the board ever did. That's more than anybody wearing that name has ever done." He set down his tools. "You don't have to trust her, Caleb. You have to trust me. You've always trusted me. Don't stop now when I need it most." Caleb looked at Clara for a long moment. Clara looked back, and to her credit, she didn't flinch, and she didn't apologize again, and she didn't try to charm him. She just held his gaze and said, "You wired half these engines, Mr. Dawson. Andre told me. I need your hands as much as his, and I know I've got no right to either of them. But I'm asking anyway." Caleb grunted. It wasn't approval exactly, but it wasn't a no. "You can hold a flashlight," he said. "We'll see about the rest." And that was how it started. That was how over the next weeks, the strangest crew in the history of the American automotive industry came together in a peeling paint garage in the poorest zip code in Asheville. A thrown-away genius, a loyal old engineer who didn't trust anybody, a billionaire CEO learning to hold a flashlight steady, and a 9-year-old girl who did her homework at the workbench and knew the names of tools most grown men had never heard of. Clara learned fast. That surprised everybody, including her. She'd grown up around engines the way rich kids grow up around horses, as decoration, as heritage, as things other people maintained. She'd never actually touched one. Never turned a wrench, never scraped a knuckle, never felt the particular ache of holding a torque position for 2 minutes while a bolt seated. Now she did all of it. She showed up at 6 every morning in jeans she'd had to go buy because she didn't own any, and she got dirty, and she got tired, and she got a blister that turned into a callus, and something in her started to change that had nothing to do with engines at all. "You're doing it wrong," Lila told her on the 3rd day watching Clara try to torque a headbolt. "I'm doing exactly what your dad showed me. You're doing what he showed you, but you're not feeling it." The little girl climbed up beside her. "Dad says you gotta feel when it's tight. Not just push till the clicky thing clicks. The clicky thing's for people who don't know how to feel it. Watch." And a 9-year-old proceeded to teach the CEO of a billion-dollar company how to seat a bolt by feel patient as a saint exactly the way her father had taught her. Clara watched those small hands so sure, so competent, and she thought about the empty archives and the erased name and everything. Richard Hale had stolen not just from Andre, but from this child who was born into a family that should have been comfortable and instead grew up in the back of a garage learning her father's genius, one bolt at a time, because it was the only inheritance nobody could take. "Your dad's a good teacher," Clara said quietly. "My dad's the best at everything," Lila said with the total certainty of a child who has never once doubted it. Then, matter of fact, "Is that why the bad man tried to make everybody forget him because he was the best?" Clara froze. She looked toward Andre 20 feet away, who'd gone very still at his own workbench. He'd heard. Of course he'd heard. "Lila," Andre said, "what do you know about a bad man?" The little girl looked suddenly guilty. "I heard you and Caleb talking when you thought I was asleep." She scuffed her shoe. "You said a man named Hale took your name off your engines and made everybody forget you built them." Her chin came up, and there was something in her face that was pure Andre, pure stubbornness, pure refusal to be small. "That's not fair, Daddy. You built them. Everybody should know you built them. I'm gonna tell everybody." Andre crossed the shop and crouched down in front of his daughter and took both her small hands in his big scarred ones. "Listen to me," he said. "You're right that it's not fair, and you're right that I built them. But I need you to understand something, baby, and it's important, so I need you to really hear it." He waited until she was looking at him. "We don't fix unfair by getting loud. We fix it by being right and being patient and telling the truth so clean and so careful that nobody can call it a lie. You understand, the bad man, he got loud. He told a big, loud story about me, and he made everybody believe it. And the way we beat a loud lie isn't with a louder one. It's with a quiet truth that doesn't ever change. You hear me? Lila nodded slowly. A quiet truth. A quiet truth. He kissed the top of her head. Now go do your reading. And Lila, you don't talk about the bad man to anybody. Not your teacher, not your friends, nobody. That's grown-up work, and I need my best girl to let me handle it. Can you do that? Yes, Daddy. That's my girl. Clara had to turn away because her eyes had filled again, and she was tired of crying in front of these people who cried so much less than her and had so much more reason to. The work went on. And as it went on, Andre began to reveal piece by piece the full scope of what Richard Hale had handed them. Come here, he told Clara one evening after Lila was asleep and Caleb had gone home. He had engine number 3 up on the lift, partway disassembled its guts, exposed under the work light. I want to show you something. You're going to want to see this with your own eyes because someday you might have to swear to it. He handed her a magnifier and pointed to a spot on the inside of the block, a place no one would ever see unless they tore the engine completely apart. Look right there. Tell me what you see. Clara looked. And there, machined into the metal so finely it was almost invisible, so small it could have been a casting flaw, were 2 letters and a number. A W3. You signed it, she breathed. Inside, where no one would ever look. I signed all 8, different spot on each one, all of them hidden. I told you even at 29 some part of me knew. Andre took the magnifier back. But here's the thing that matters, Clara. That mark isn't just a signature, it's a date stamp. The machining process I used to put it there, the specific tooling, it can be dated by a forensic metallurgist to within a few months. Which means I can prove not just that I built this engine, but when. Before the disposal records say it was destroyed, years before Hale claims these units stopped existing. He set the magnifier down. You understand what that does? Clara was starting to. It proves the disposal records are fake. It proves the disposal records are fraudulent. There's a difference, and the difference is a crime. Andre wiped his hands. Hale's whole scheme depends on paper that says these engines were scrapped years ago. That's how he got them off the books at 0 value. That's how he sold them for millions with nobody the wiser. But the engines are sitting right here, and inside them is proof of exactly when they were really made, and it doesn't match his paper. The physical object contradicts the official record, and in a fraud case, Clara, the physical object, always wins. Clara sat down slowly on an overturned crate. She was quiet for a while. How long have you known you could do this? She asked finally. Prove all of it. Take him down. 11 years. 11 years. She stared at him. You've had the ability to destroy the man who ruined your life for 11 years, and you never used it. Why would you just sit here in this while he... Because for 11 years I didn't have the engines, Andre said simply. The proof was locked in Hale's own vault. I couldn't get to it. The only thing I had was my word against a billion-dollar company and a settlement agreement that would have let them sue me into the ground if I so much as said my own name out loud. He looked around the shop. So I did the only thing I could do. I kept my head down. I raised my daughter. I fixed cars for people who couldn't afford anywhere better. I built a life out of the pieces they left me, and I made it a good life, Clara, a real one, and I did not spend 11 years poisoning myself, waiting for a revenge I couldn't have. He met her eyes. And then one Monday morning a truck showed up, and Richard Hale personally delivered the only thing I was missing right to my front door. The evidence. He gave me the evidence. Because he was so sure I was nothing that he never imagined I might be the one man alive who could read it. Clara felt a chill move through her. That's almost Andre. That's almost like fate. No such thing as fate, Andre said. There's just arrogance and there's patience. And sooner or later, arrogance always hands patience the knife. He pulled the cover back over engine 3. Now, we've got a bigger problem than proof. We've got proof coming out our ears. What we don't have is a plan that keeps you alive inside that company long enough to use it. Because that was the trap, and they both knew it. Clara couldn't simply walk into a board meeting and announce that her executive director was a thief. Hale had been at the company for 20 years. He'd put people on that board. He'd done favors, buried problems, made himself indispensable. He had lawyers and allies and a warm, fatherly voice that had fooled Gerald Vallon for 2 decades. If Clara moved too early, or moved sloppily, Hale would flip it. He'd paint her as the erratic one, the grieving in-over-her-head daughter, unfit to run the company, chasing conspiracies, being manipulated by a bitter ex-employee with a grudge. He'd have her removed for the good of the shareholders. And then he'd bury the engines for real this time, and Andre with them. He's already planting it, Clara realized aloud. The story. On the phone when I asked about you, he said people like you resurface when there's a change in leadership, that you'd see a young CEO as an easy mark. He was setting it up. He was building the story that if anything came out, it was you manipulating me. Of course he was. That's what he does. He builds the story first, then he makes the facts fit it. Andre nodded slowly. Which means we can't win this by surprising him. He's too good at improvising. We win it by boxing him in so completely that when the moment comes, there's no story left for him to tell. Every exit closed. Every lie already contradicted by something he can't deny. How? Andre was quiet for a moment. Then he told her. The plan was patient, the way Andre was patient. It would take weeks. First, they would finish restoring the engines, all 8, not for show, but because a restored running engine that outperformed its original specs was undeniable in a way a rusted block never could be. It was proof you could hear, proof that roared. Second, Clara would go back to headquarters and behave exactly as if nothing had changed. She would be the slightly overwhelmed young CEO Hale expected. She would ask his advice. She would defer to him. She would let him relax. And while he relaxed, she would quietly, carefully, using nothing but her own inherited authority, begin pulling the financial threads, the shell company, the offshore accounts, the disposal contracts, building a paper trail that matched the physical proof sitting in Andre's shop. He'll have hidden the money well, Clara said. 20 years. He'll have it buried deep. He will. But you've got something he never counted on you having. Andre almost smiled. Your father's private files. Hale doesn't know they exist. He thinks he scrubbed everything. He has no idea that the one man who could have exposed him, your daddy, kept a confession in a basement server 20 years running. You're not starting from nothing, Clara. You're starting from a map your father drew you from beyond the grave. Use it. And so, they built it. 2 efforts running side by side, 3 hours apart. In Charlotte, Clara Vallon played the dutiful daughter by day and became a forensic accountant by night, following her father's map through a maze of shell companies and falsified disposal records, documenting everything, copying everything, telling no one. And in Asheville, Andre and Caleb and one determined little girl brought 8 dead engines back to life, one impossible day at a time. It was during those weeks that something Clara had not planned for began to happen. Something that had nothing to do with fraud or evidence or revenge. She started to look forward to Asheville, not for the engines, for the shop, for the 6 a.m. coffee that tasted like burnt regret and somehow like home, for Caleb's grudging, slowly thawing respect, for Lila, who had appointed herself Clara's engineering instructor and corrected her mercilessly, and had one day without any fanfare at all reached over and taken Clara's hand while they waited for a test to finish the way she'd take her father's hand, like it was nothing like Clara belonged there. And for Andre. Most of all, though she wouldn't let herself say it for Andre, she watched him with his daughter and saw a kind of man she'd been told didn't exist, patient beyond reason, gentle without weakness, carrying an ocean of loss and refusing to let one drop of it spill onto his child. She watched him fix a neighbor's car for free, because the woman was a nurse working doubles and couldn't afford a rental. She watched him teach Lila that the answer to being thrown away was not to throw others away. and Clara Valen, who had grown up believing that success was measured in the things you could count. Money status, the deference of others, began to understand that she was standing in the presence of a wealth she had never in her life possessed and had never even known to want. "Can I ask you something?" she said one night near the end when the engines were nearly done and the plan was nearly ready, and the thing between them had become impossible to ignore and impossible to name. "Something personal." Andre was cleaning his hands at the sink. "You can ask." "Renata, Lila's mother. What was she like?" Andre's hands went still under the water for a moment. Then he shut off the tap and dried them slowly, and Clara thought she'd overstepped, thought he wouldn't answer. But when he turned around, his face was soft in a way she'd never seen. "She was the smartest person I ever knew," he said. "Smarter than me. Everybody thinks I'm the smart one because I build engines, but Renata could look at a person and know them in about a minute flat. She saw straight through people." A small, sad smile. "She saw Richard Hale for what he was years before I did. She told me. She said, 'Andre, that man smiles too easy, watch him.' And I didn't listen because I trusted the company. I trusted your father. I thought if you just did good work and were honest, the world would be honest back." He hung the towel up. "She was pregnant with Lila when she got sick. Went so fast. By the time the baby came, she held her daughter twice Clara, and then she was gone. And 3 weeks later, Hale came for my career, and I signed his paper in a hospital daze of grief with a newborn at home, and I've spent 11 years wondering if I could have fought harder if I'd let him win, because I was too broken to stand up." "Andre." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "You had a newborn. You'd just buried your wife. You didn't let him win. He ambushed a man at the lowest moment of his life. That's not you being weak. That's him being a predator. I know that now." Andre looked at her. "It took me a long time to know it. And you want to know who finally made me understand it?" He nodded toward the back room, toward his sleeping daughter. "That kid. Because one day she's going to be grown, and someone's going to try to make her feel small the way the world's already started trying, and I realized I couldn't teach her to stand up if I was still sitting down. I couldn't tell her that being thrown away doesn't mean you're worthless if I still believed it about myself." His voice was rough. "So I stopped believing it. Renata would have knocked me upside the head years ago for believing it as long as I did." Clara was crying again quietly, and this time she didn't apologize for it. And Andre didn't tell her to stop. "I don't say this to make it strange," Andre said carefully. "And I don't say it because of anything except that it's true, and you should hear a true thing after all the lies you've been swimming in. You're not the woman who walked into my shop that Monday. I don't know exactly when it changed. Somewhere between the flashlight and the blisters and Lila deciding you were hers. But you're different now. You do know that, right? You didn't just uncover a fraud these last few weeks. You became somebody your father would have been proud of in a way I don't think he was proud of himself at the end." They stood there in the quiet shop 3 feet apart, the engines gleaming around them, and something passed between them that neither of them was ready to name, and both of them felt all the way down. And then Clara's phone buzzed, and the moment broke, and she looked down at it, and every drop of color drained out of her face. "What?" Andre said. "What is it?" She turned the phone toward him. It was an email. From Richard Hale. Sent to the full board CCing Clara 3 minutes ago at 11 at night. The subject line read, "Concerns regarding leadership stability and a matter requiring the board's attention." "He knows," Clara whispered. "Andre, he knows. He found out I've been in the files or the financials, or he's moving. He's moving first. He's going to the board to have me removed before I can move on him." Her hands were shaking. "This is it. This is exactly what you said he'd do. He's telling the story first. He's calling me unstable, grieving, manipulated. Oh God, he's going to say, I've been secretly meeting with a bitter ex-employee. He's going to say, you. Read it." Andre said, very calm, very steady. The calm of a man who'd been waiting 11 years and did not intend to panic in the final hour. "Out loud. All of it. We need to know exactly what he's claiming." Clara read it. And it was worse than she'd feared. And it was also, in a way, Andre saw immediately, and Clara was too frightened to see yet exactly the mistake they needed him to make. Hale had written to the board that he had grave concerns about the CEO's judgment, that she'd been making unauthorized inquiries into settled legacy matters, that she'd been traveling frequently to undisclosed locations and meeting with an individual who had a documented history of instability and litigation against the company. He was requesting an emergency board session to discuss whether current leadership is equipped to protect shareholder interests. He was, in short, doing precisely what Andre had predicted months ahead of schedule, because Clara had gotten close enough to the money that he'd panicked. But in his panic, in his arrogance, Richard Hale had put it in writing. "Clara," Andre said slowly, and there was something almost gentle in it, almost like wonder. "Look at what he just did. He's destroying me is what he did. No, look again. Read it like Renata would have read it." Andre took the phone from her trembling hands and held it up. "He just told the entire board in writing on the record that you've been making inquiries into settled legacy matters." He named it. He put his own hand on the exact thing he needs to stay buried, and he did it in an email that a dozen people just received and that lives on a server forever. Andre lowered the phone and looked at her, and slowly, for the first time in the entire long night, he smiled the real one. The craftsman's smile, the smile of a man watching the last bolt seat exactly where he'd known it would. "He got loud, Clara. After 11 years of being so careful, so patient, so quiet, the second he got scared, he got loud. Just like I told Lila. And you know how you beat a loud lie." Clara stared at him, and slowly through the terror, she began to understand. "With a quiet truth," she whispered. "That doesn't ever change." "That doesn't ever change." Andre handed her back the phone. "He wants an emergency board meeting. Good. Let him have it. Let him stand up in front of that whole board and tell his big, loud story about the unstable CEO and the bitter ex-employee." He turned and looked at the 8 engines gleaming and whole, and ready, holding their hidden signatures and their dated proof, and the whole confession of everything Richard Hale had done. "And then we walk in with these, and we let the truth roar." The emergency board meeting was set for the following Friday, 10 in the morning, in the glass conference room on the top floor of Vallon headquarters, where Gerald Vallon had once put his arm around a young engineer's shoulders and called him the best he'd ever hired. They had 6 days. "It's not enough time to finish all 8, Caleb said the morning after Hale's email standing over the disassembled guts of engine number 7. "We can get 3 running clean, 4 if we don't sleep, not 8. "We don't need 8, Andre said. "We need 1 that roars and 7 that testify. The running engine is theater. The proof is inside all of them running or not." He looked at Clara. "But we do need a metallurgist. Somebody independent credentialed who can date those signatures and swear to it in front of the board and in front of a judge if it comes to that. And we need him in the next 6 days. You know anybody?" "I know a dozen anybodies," Clara said. "The problem is that half of them have done work for Vallon, which means half of them have taken money from Hale at some point, which means I can't trust any of them not to warn him." She thought for a moment. "But there's a woman at the university. Dr. Priya Anand, Materials Science Forensic Metallurgy. She testified against a Vallon supplier years ago in a defect case cost the company a fortune. Hale hates her, which is exactly why she's the one person he could never have bought. An enemy of your enemy," Caleb said. "A woman who told the truth once when it cost her and got punished for it." Andre corrected. "Same as us. Get her, Clara. Tell her everything. If she's who you say she is, she'll come." Dr. Anand came. Clara drove to the university that same afternoon and laid it all out on the woman's cluttered desk. The files, the fraud, the 11-year-old memo, the engines. Dr. Anand listened without a word, her face growing harder and harder. And when Clara finished, the metallurgist took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes and said, "You're telling me Richard Hale destroyed an engineer's entire life to cover a theft and now he's about to do it to you, and the proof is sitting in a repair shop in Asheville?" "Yes." "And the engineer he destroyed, what's his name?" Andre Whitmore. Dr. Anand went very still. Andre Whitmore designed the Vallon Championship powertrain. That's an industry legend. There's a whole apocryphal story that the real designer got pushed out and erased, but nobody could ever prove it. It's just a thing people whisper at conferences. It's not apocryphal, Clara said quietly. It's a Tuesday, and you can meet him tomorrow if you'll come to Asheville. Dr. Priya Anand came to Asheville the next morning at 6, walked into Carter Auto Restoration, saw the 8 Heritage engines lined up under the work lights, and Clara watched a woman who'd spent 30 years around machines put her hand over her mouth like she'd walked into a cathedral. My God, she breathed. They're real. These are the units. They were supposed to have been destroyed a decade ago. It's in every Heritage record. Show her Andre, Clara said, and Andre showed her. He put engine number 3 up on the lift, and he handed Dr. Anand the magnifier, and he pointed to the tiny signature machined into the inner casting. And Dr. Anand looked at it for a long, long time. Then she pulled a loop and a small ultraviolet light out of her own bag because a forensic metallurgist comes prepared, and she looked again, and when she straightened up, her hands were not quite steady. This tooling signature, she said slowly. The machining marks. Do you know what these can tell me? I know exactly what they can tell you, Andre said. That's why I put them there. Dr. Anand looked at him, really looked at the man in the coveralls at the shop at the whole improbable truth of it, and something like awe crossed her face. You built forensic dating into your own engines, she said, 11 years before you'd need it. You signed a confession in reverse so that when someone finally lied about when these were made, the metal itself would call them a liar. I was a scared young man who'd learned the company didn't always tell the truth, Andre said. I hoped I'd never need it, but hope's not a plan. So I built the plan and prayed I could throw it away. He met her eyes. Turns out I couldn't. Can you date it, Dr. Anand? Can you swear to it? I can date it to within 4 months, and I can swear to it in front of God and the board and the Supreme Court of the United States, Dr. Anand said. And when I do, every disposal record Richard Hale ever filed becomes a felony with his signature on it. She began pulling equipment out of her bag. Get me a clean surface in 48 hours. I'll have you a report no lawyer alive can break. The next 5 days were the longest of Clara Vallon's life. She went back to Charlotte and played her part. She sat in Richard Hale's office and let him tell her with that warm fatherly concern that the board meeting was just a formality. Clara, just some of the older members wanting reassurance, nothing for you to worry about. She let him pat her hand. She let him believe he'd already won. And the whole time she was thinking about a 9-year-old teaching her to feel when a bolt was tight and a quiet truth that doesn't ever change. And she smiled and nodded and betrayed nothing. And Richard Hale, master manipulator, missed it completely because he had spent his whole life so certain of his own superiority that it never occurred to him the young woman across the desk might be running the exact play he thought he'd invented. You've been traveling a lot, he said, casually testing. Getting away. Understandable with the grief. Anywhere nice? Just clearing my head, Clara said. You were right, Richard. I was in over it for a while there. I'm grateful you've been holding things steady. And she watched him relax, watched the last of his suspicion melt into satisfaction, and she thought, there it is. There's the arrogance handing Patience the knife. On Thursday night, the night before the meeting, they loaded the engines. It took a flatbed and a rented crane and 6 hours, and Andre supervised every ounce of it personally because these engines had traveled once already as garbage, and he'd be damned if they'd travel like garbage again. They wrapped them clean. They secured them right. And engine number 3, restored complete its every part, rebuilt by the hands that first made it, they loaded last, and Andre stood with his hand on it for a moment before they covered it. You okay, Dad? Lila asked. She was up past her bedtime, wrapped in a coat, watching the whole thing with enormous, serious eyes. I'm okay, baby. Are you scared? Andre crouched down to her level. A little, he admitted. You know what I told you about being brave? That brave isn't when you're not scared. Lila recited it like scripture. Brave is when you're scared and you tell the truth anyway. That's my girl. He pulled her into a hug. Tomorrow, your daddy's going to go tell the truth in front of a whole lot of important people who spent 11 years pretending he doesn't exist. And I'm scared. But I'm going to do it anyway. Because you're watching. And because it's right. And because a man's name is worth standing up for. Can I come? No, baby. Tomorrow you go to school like always. But Ms. Clara's going to record it on her phone. And when it's over, I'm going to come home and show you the exact moment the whole world finally learns your daddy's name. Deal. Deal. She held out her small hand, and they shook on it, engineer to engineer. Friday morning, 10 a.m. The glass conference room on the top floor of Valen headquarters filled with 12 members of the board of directors. Most of them gray, most of them men. Several of them handpicked over the years by Richard Hale. They took their seats around the long table. At the head sat Clara, Valen's CEO, looking every inch the composed young executive. And at the other end, at ease radiating the calm confidence of a man who'd already counted his votes, sat Richard Hale. He'd worn his best suit. He'd come to win. Thank you all for coming on short notice. Hale began, standing, his voice warm and grave. I want to be clear that it gives me no pleasure to be here. I love Gerald Valen like a brother. I have served this company for 20 years. And it is precisely that love and that service that compel me, however painfully, to raise concerns about the direction of our current leadership. He was good. Clara had to give him that. She watched him work the room, watched him build his story, brick by careful brick, the grieving daughter out of her depth, making erratic inquiries into settled matters, traveling to undisclosed locations, falling under the influence of a former employee with a documented grudge and a history of instability. He never raised his voice. He never accused. He worried. He worried out loud, generously, sorrowfully, and Clara could see several of the older board members nodding along, their faces creasing with concern. I don't say this lightly, Hale went on, but I believe Clara has been targeted by a man who left this company under a cloud 11 years ago. A man who I fear sees a young, grieving CEO as an opportunity. I have evidence she's been meeting with him. And I believe, gentlemen, and I say this as someone who cares deeply for Gerald's daughter, that she is being manipulated in ways she doesn't even understand, and that our fiduciary duty requires us to consider whether she is currently fit to lead. He sat down. He'd done it beautifully. The room was heavy with it, the older members exchanging glances, the story taking root exactly as he'd planted it. He looked at Clara with an expression of infinite fatherly sadness, and Clara understood that he genuinely believed in this moment that he had already won. Clara, said the board chairman gently, would you like to respond? Clara stood. Thank you, Richard, she said, for your concern. And she let a beat pass. And then she said, you're right about one thing. I have been meeting with a former employee. I've been meeting with him for weeks. His name is Whitmore. And before I say anything else, I'd like the board to meet him, because he has something to show you that I think changes the nature of this conversation. The door opened, and Whitmore walked into the glass conference room on the top floor of Valen headquarters, the room he'd been thrown out of 11 years ago, in a clean-pressed shirt, his scarred hands steady at his sides, his head high. Behind him came Caleb Dawson, and behind Caleb came Dr. Priya Anand, carrying a folder. And behind her, through the glass wall, the board could see the flatbed truck that had pulled up in the plaza below, and the crane and the shapes of 8 engines under clean white covers. Richard Hale's face did something Clara would remember for the rest of her life. For just 1 second, one single second before he got it back under control, the warm, fatherly mask slipped, and underneath it was something cold and reptilian and afraid. This is exactly what I was warning you about, Hale said, recovering, turning to the board, his voice sharpening. This man has no business in this room. He signed a separation agreement. There's a non-disparagement clause. Anything he says here is a breach, and frankly, letting him in is a serious lapse in judgment that only proves my Mr. Hale is right that I signed an agreement, Andre said. His voice was quiet, but it carried, and the room went still to hear it. 11 years ago, 3 weeks after I buried my wife, I signed it in a fog of grief with a newborn daughter at home. And I signed away the right to ever tell anyone that I designed the engines that made this company its fortune. He looked around the table, meeting eyes one by one. So I won't tell you that. I won't say a word about who designed those engines. I'll let the engines tell you themselves. He nodded to Dr. Anand. My name is Dr. Priya Anand, she said, stepping forward, opening her folder. I'm a forensic metallurgist. 30 years in the field, tenured faculty, court-qualified expert in 6 states. I have no relationship with this company, and frankly this company has reason to dislike me, which some of you may remember. I'm here because Ms. Vallon asked me to examine 8 engines and answer one simple question: when were they made? She laid the first page on the table. The official heritage records of this company state that these 8 units were decommissioned and destroyed as scrap material approximately 10 years ago. Those records are signed. She looked up. By Richard Hale. This is absurd, Hale started. The engines were not destroyed. Dr. Anand continued, her voice level and merciless. They exist. They're on a truck in your plaza. And each one contains an internal machining signature applied by the original engineer during fabrication that can be forensically dated by the tooling marks. I have dated all 8. She laid down the report. Every single one was fabricated years before the disposal records claim the units stopped existing. Which means, gentlemen, that the disposal records are not merely inaccurate. They are fabricated. These assets were written down to 0 value, declared destroyed, and then I'd stake my career on it, and I'm about to sold off the books for a great deal of money. I can prove when these engines were made. I cannot be broken on it because it's not my opinion. It's the metal. The room had gone dead silent. Clara, Hale said, and his voice had changed, now gotten lower, gotten urgent, the fatherly warmth entirely gone. Whatever this man has told you, whatever this so-called expert— I haven't finished, Richard, Clara said, and she opened her own folder. Her father's folder, the map from beyond the grave, and she began quietly to lay it out. The shell company, the offshore accounts, the pattern 11 years long of heritage assets written down to 0 and vanishing, while money appeared in accounts that traced through 4 layers of misdirection back to a single beneficial owner. She'd followed every thread. She'd documented every one. She laid the pages on the table one by one, and with each page, another board member leaned forward, and the color drained a little further from Richard Hale's face. And this, Clara said, laying down the last page, is a memo, dated 11 years ago, written by an engineer who refused to certify these very units as worthless because he knew it was fraud. He wouldn't sign the disposal contract. 3 weeks later, his wife died, and 3 weeks after that, Richard Hale went to my father and had that engineer removed from this company on charges of instability and financial irregularity that were every one of them invented. She looked down the table at Hale. You told me that story yourself, Richard. On the phone, word for word. You told it so smoothly, so ready, because you'd rehearsed it for 11 years. You destroyed a man to hide a theft. And then when I got close to it, you tried to destroy me the exact same way. Grieving, unstable, manipulated. The same story. You only know one song, Richard, and you just sang it in writing to this entire board. Richard Hale stood up. This is a coordinated ambush, he said, and now the reptile was fully out, cold and fast and dangerous. Orchestrated by a bitter man and a naive girl. That memo is a forgery. This expert is compromised. These engines could have been machined last week for all anyone. They couldn't, Dr. Anand said flatly. The oxidation alone rules it out, but by all means, Mr. Hale, tell a court the metal is lying. I'd enjoy that. My father knew, Clara said, and her voice cracked the room open. That's the part you never counted on. He knew what you were, Richard, at the end. He wrote it down. He kept the files you thought you'd scrubbed in a place you never knew existed. She pulled out the last page, Gerald Vallon's confession, in his own hand. He wrote, and I'm going to read this to the board so it's on the record forever. Do not trust Richard Hale, whatever he tells you. Our fortune is built on a genius we threw away, and the man who threw him away is still in this building, and he is more dangerous than you can imagine. She looked up. My father was a coward once when it counted, and he knew it, and it broke him. But he left me a map so I wouldn't be, and I'm not going to be. The board chairman, an old man who'd known Gerald Vallon for 40 years, reached out with a trembling hand and drew the confession toward himself. He read it, and when he looked up, he looked at Richard Hale like he'd never seen him before. Richard, the old man said quietly, is any of this true? And Richard Hale cornered exposed his 20-year kingdom collapsing in a glass room in the space of 20 minutes, made the final mistake of a man who'd always believed he was the smartest person in every room. He got loud. You want to talk about who built this company? He snarled, jabbing a finger down the table at Andre. I ran this company for 20 years while men like him got the glory for turning a wrench. I made the hard decisions. I did what Gerald was too weak to do. Yes, I sold the engines. They were sitting there worth millions, gathering dust, and I turned them into money. That's not theft. That's vision. And when this mechanic got in the way, I did what had to be done, and Gerald thanked me for it. Don't you understand? He was relieved. He stopped. The room was staring at him in frozen horror. Clara's phone sat on the table screen, up recording light, glowing red. It had been recording the entire time. Andre Whitmore looked at the man who had taken his wife's final weeks. His life's work. His name, his 11 years, the man who had just confessed to all of it in front of 12 witnesses and a camera. And Andre did not shout. He did not lunge. He did not do a single one of the things a lesser man, a louder man, would have earned the right to do. He just looked at Richard Hale steady and quiet, and he said, You were right about one thing. I do turn a wrench. I turned enough of them to build the engines you got rich stealing. And you spent 11 years so sure I was nothing that you handed me the one thing you had left to lose. He glanced at the truck in the plaza, the 8 engines under their clean white covers. You dumped my whole life in my lap and called it garbage. And it turned out to be the only thing that could ever bring you down. That's not vision, Mr. Hale. That's just a man too arrogant to imagine the trash could talk. The chairman stood. Security, he said, and his voice was iron. Escort Mr. Hale from the building. Legal is going to want everything, and I do mean everything. Richard, you're relieved. Effective this second. It was over that fast. 20 years undone in 20 minutes by a quiet truth that didn't change. They led Richard Hale out. He didn't go quietly. He never did anything quietly, but nobody was listening to him anymore. The story he'd told for 11 years had finally run out of people willing to believe it. At the door, he turned and looked back at Andre one last time, and whatever venom he meant to spit died in his throat, because Andre wasn't even looking at him. Andre was looking out the glass wall down at the plaza, at 8 engines, in the morning sun. When the door closed, the chairman turned to Andre. The old man's eyes were wet. Mr. Whitmore, he said, I was on the board 11 years ago. I voted to accept your separation. I believed Richard's story. I never once asked to hear yours. His voice broke. There is no apology adequate to what this company took from you. But I'm an old man, and I've got no time left for anything but the truth, so I'll say it plain in front of everyone. You built the greatest thing this company ever made. We threw you away to protect a thief, and we spent 11 years pretending you never existed. And that ends today. Your name goes back on every design. Publicly, permanently, starting this afternoon. Andre was quiet for a moment. Clara watched him, and she knew what those words cost him to receive. Knew he was thinking of Renata, who saw Hale first, and of a shoebox on a closet shelf, and of a little girl who taught a CEO to feel when a bolt was tight. Thank you, Andre said finally. And then because he was who he was, but I don't want it for me. Mr. Whitmore, I've got a daughter, Andre said, 9 years old. She's at school right now learning her times tables in a world that already decided what she is before she opened her mouth. He looked around the table at all of them. Put my name back not because I earned it, though I did. Put it back so that someday she can look it up and see it in black and white, undeniable, permanent, that her father built something real and the world tried to steal it, and in the end it couldn't. That's the only reason I'm standing in this room. Not for me, for her. So she grows up knowing that a quiet truth outlasts a loud lie every single time. That's all I ever wanted out of any of this. His voice went rough at the very end, just slightly, the only crack he allowed himself in the whole room, full of the people who'd erased him. That's all I ever wanted. Clara Vallon, standing at the head of the table where her father used to stand, looked at Andre Whitmore and understood that she had spent her whole life measuring the wrong things, and that the wealthiest man she had ever met was a single father in a repair shop who had just been handed back everything he'd lost and asked for it to be given instead to his child. Andre drove home to Asheville that afternoon with the windows down, though it was cold because he needed the air, needed to feel the world moving past him fast and real and free. He'd told Clara he wanted to pick Lila up from school himself. Some things a man does alone. So while Clara stayed in Charlotte to deal with lawyers and a shell-shocked board, and the beginning of what would become a federal investigation that would keep prosecutors busy for 2 years, Andre parked outside Asheville Elementary at 3 o'clock and waited at the fence like he did every day, one more father among the mothers and grandmothers, and the occasional other dad, invisible and ordinary, and exactly where he wanted to be. The bell rang, the doors opened, and Lila came running out with her backpack bouncing, and when she saw him, her whole face lit up the way it did every single day, the way it had lit up before he had a name back, and would keep lighting up long after anyone stopped caring that he did. Dad. She hit him at a full run, and he caught her and swung her up the way he had when she was smaller before his back started reminding him he wasn't young. Did you do it? Did you tell the truth? Did they learn your name? I did, baby. He set her down and crouched to her level right there on the sidewalk with the other parents flowing around them. They learned it, the whole room, and Miss Clara recorded the whole thing just like I promised so I can show you tonight. Was the bad man there? He was there. Did he get in trouble? Andre thought about how to say it. He got exactly what he built, he said finally. That's usually how it works out in the end. It just takes longer than you want it to. Lila studied his face with those serious eyes that were so much her mother's. You don't look happy, Dad. You did it. Why don't you look happy? And Andre, who had held himself together through a glass conference room full of the people who'd erased him, who had not cracked when the chairman apologized, or when his name was handed back, or when Richard Hale confessed, found that his eyes were suddenly stinging on a sidewalk outside an elementary school, with his daughter's small hands on his face. I am happy, baby, he said, and his voice was thick. I'm thinking about your mama. She saw all this coming, you know, years ago. She'd have been proud of your daddy today, and I wish... He stopped, cleared his throat. I wish she could have been in that room, that's all. Some happy's got a little sad mixed in it. You'll understand that when you're older. The best kind of happy usually does. Leela wrapped her arms around his neck and held on, and Andre held his daughter on a public sidewalk and let the sad and the happy sit together in his chest where they belonged. And neither of them said anything for a while, and neither of them needed to. Clara came to Asheville that weekend, and the weekend after, and the one after that. She told herself at first that it was about the engines. There was a great deal to sort out. The 8 heritage units were now central evidence in a federal fraud case, and there were forms and depositions, and Dr. Anand's forensic report to be formalized, and 100 reasons for the CEO of Vallon Automotive to drive 3 hours to a repair shop in Asheville. She told herself it was business. It stopped being business somewhere around the 4th weekend, when Andre made dinner in the little apartment behind the shop. Nothing fancy. Just his mother's recipe for red beans and rice. And Clara sat at the same Formica table, where he'd once spread out 11 years of his hidden life, and Lila talked her ear off about a science project, and Clara laughed until she cried, and realized on the drive home that she couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that, and that she didn't want to remember because it didn't matter anymore, because she had it now. You know she's in love with you, Caleb told Andre one evening, the two of them cleaning up the shop after Clara had left. Caleb had come all the way around on Clara somewhere in the last weeks. It was hard not to watching her scrub engine grease out from under her manicure and never once complain about it. Don't start, Caleb. I'm just saying what I see, and I'll tell you something else I see since we're being honest. You're in love with her too. You just won't let yourself say it because you're scared. Andre didn't answer right away. He wiped down the workbench slow. It's complicated, he finally said. It's not complicated. You like each other. You're good together. That little girl of yours lights up when she walks in. What's complicated? She runs a billion-dollar company, Caleb. I fix cars in a neighborhood the city forgot about. Her world and my world. Man, stop. Caleb threw down his rag. You know who used to talk like that? Talk about her world and my world, about what's proper, about staying in the box the world drew for you, Hale? That's Hale's whole religion, that everybody's got their place, and you don't step out of it. You gonna let that dead and buried snake tell you who you're allowed to love from the grave? Andre was quiet. Renata wouldn't have, Caleb said more gently now. Renata married a scholarship kid from nothing when her family said she was throwing herself away. She never once asked whose world it was. She just picked her person and built a world with him. You know that better than anybody. Andre set down his rag. Low blow, Caleb. Truth usually is. Caleb picked his own rag back up. That woman didn't spend 11 weeks driving 3 hours each way and scrubbing grease and learning to feel a bolt from your daughter because she cares about federal fraud paperwork. Andre. She did it because she found something in this broke-down garage that she couldn't find in a mansion. Same thing you found. Don't be a fool about it. You already lost 11 years to being too broken to reach for good things. Don't lose 11 more to being too proud. Andre didn't say anything. But that night after Caleb left and Lila was asleep, he stood in the doorway of his shop and looked at the empty space where the engines used to sit. And he thought about a woman who'd wept on his front step over a stranger's pain. And he thought maybe Caleb was right. Maybe he'd earned the right to reach for one good thing without checking first whether the world thought he was allowed. The engines sold in the end. All 8. Once the federal case established clear title and the fraud was fully documented, the board with Clara's blessing and Andre's arranged their sale to a private automotive collector, one of the largest in the world, a man who understood exactly what these units were and what they represented. The bid came in at $5 million for all 8. The same 8 engines a delivery driver had dumped on a poor man's floor and called free junk. $5 million to get back the very things the company had thrown away. But when the collector's representative called to finalize, he asked the question that everyone in the industry was asking. By then, the question that had turned a quiet fraud case into a legend whispered at every automotive conference in the country. Who restored them? I want it in the provenance. The name of whoever brought these back to life. Clara was standing in Andre's shop when she took the call. She looked at Andre across the room and she smiled and she said into the phone, "The original engineer who designed them, the man who built them the first time built them again. His name is Andre Whitmore. And you're going to want to put that name in letters big enough for the whole world to read." There was a pause on the line, then quietly with something like reverence. Andre Whitmore restored these himself. The Andre Whitmore, I'll double the provenance documentation. That name is worth more than the engines. When she hung up, Clara turned to Andre. $5 million, and every penny is going to be fought over, some to restitution, some to the company. The lawyers will spend a year sorting it. But there's a piece that's yours, Andre. Free and clear. Ownership rights you were denied 11 years ago restored with interest. It's going to be a lot of money. Life-changing money. Andre was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head slowly. Put it in a trust, he said. For Lila. Every dollar. College and whatever she wants to build after. And enough left over that she never once in her life has to sign a bad man's paper because she's too broke and too tired to fight him. He looked at Clara. That's what the money's for. That's the only thing it was ever for. And you, what do you get? Andre gestured around the shop. The peeling paint. The hand-painted sign that still said Carter. The tools worn smooth by his own hands. The whole small, honest kingdom he'd built out of the pieces the world had left him. I already got what I wanted, he said. I got my name back, and I got to keep this, and I got to teach my daughter that the truth wins even when it takes 11 years, even when nobody's watching, even when you're the only one who still believes it." He shrugged. "A man doesn't need $5 million, Clara. He needs to be able to look his kid in the eye. I could already do that. Now I can do it in front of the whole world. That's the wealth. Everything else is just numbers." Clara looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something she'd been wanting to do for weeks, and hadn't let herself. She crossed the shop and she took his scarred hand in both of hers, and she said, "You are the richest man I've ever known, and I grew up around billionaires." "Clara, let me finish. I've been driving 3 hours each way for 3 months and telling myself it was about paperwork, and we both know it wasn't, and I'm tired of being a coward about it. My father was a coward when it counted, and it cost him everything, and I promised myself I wouldn't be. So I'm not going to be. I don't care about your world and my world. I care about the 6 a.m. coffee and the red beans and rice and that little girl who taught me to feel when a bolt is tight. I care about you. And if that scares you, that's fine, but you're going to have to tell me to stop coming, because otherwise I'm going to keep showing up, and eventually you're going to have to admit that you're glad I do." Andre looked at her, and a slow smile broke across his face, the warm one, the rare one, the one Clara had only seen him give his daughter. "Renata told me once. He said that I was the smartest man she ever met and the dumbest man she ever loved. She said I could see the inside of an engine, but I couldn't see what was right in front of my face." He turned his hand over so it held hers instead of the other way around. "I'm trying to be smarter now, so I'm going to say the thing instead of being dumb about it. Don't stop coming, Clara. Please, don't stop." From the doorway to the apartment, a small voice said with enormous satisfaction, "Finally!" They both turned. Lila was standing there in her pajamas, arms crossed, grinning like she'd solved the whole thing herself, which she'd later insist for years she basically had. "You were supposed to be asleep," Andre said. "I've been rooting for you two for like a month," Lila said, ignoring this entirely. "Caleb owes me $5. He said Dad was too stubborn." She marched over and inserted herself between them, taking a hand from each, and looked up at Clara with those serious eyes. "Does this mean you're gonna live here now? 'Cause your apartment in Charlotte is fancy, but it doesn't have any good tools." Clara laughed, and it came out wet. "We'll figure it out, sweetheart. One bolt at a time." "By feel," Lila corrected. "Not with the clicky thing." "By feel," Clara agreed. "I promise." The months that followed remade all of their lives slowly in the patient way real things happen. The federal case ground forward. Richard Hale, faced with Clara's recording and Dr. Anand's forensics, and 11 years of financial evidence her father had unknowingly preserved, took a plea rather than face a jury. He would spend years paying for what he'd done. The theft, the fraud, and though it could never be charged as such, the 11 years he'd stolen from a grieving man and his motherless child. He went out the way men like him always eventually go, not with the roar he'd lived by, but silently forgotten his loud story finally run out of listeners. The last anyone heard, he never once apologized. Men like that never do. They can't. Apology requires seeing another person as real, and Richard Hale had spent his whole life unable to see anyone but himself. Andre's name went back on the engines. Publicly. Permanently. Vallon Automotive issued a formal statement acknowledging that Andre Whitmore was the sole designer of its legendary heritage powertrain, that he had been wrongfully removed, and that the company was correcting the record. The industry press, which loved a legend, ran with it. The whispered conference story turned out to be true. The erased genius turned out to be alive and well, and fixing cars in Asheville, and reporters drove out to the little shop, wanting the tale of vindication and revenge. Andre gave them a different story than they came for. "This isn't a revenge story," he told one of them, a young journalist, who'd expected bitterness and found none. "Revenge would have meant I let that man live in my head for 11 years. I didn't. I raised my daughter. I built a life. The engines coming back was just the truth catching up to where I'd already been standing the whole time." He looked at her steadily. "You want to write something true. Write that the world throws away things it doesn't understand. It throws away people. And every now and then, one of those thrown-away people turns out to be the only one who knew the real value of what got tossed. Write that. That's the story. She wrote it. It went everywhere. And in classrooms and break rooms and garages all over the country, men who'd been passed over and looked through and counted out, read it and felt something loosen in their chests. And that more than any court verdict was Andre Whitmore's real vindication. The little shop changed, and it didn't. Valen wanted Andre back, offered him a title, a corner office, a laboratory, anything. Andre said no. But he made them a counteroffer, and it was pure Andre he'd consult on his terms from Asheville, and in exchange Valen would fund a program he'd design himself. An apprenticeship. For kids from neighborhoods like his kids, the world had already decided about kids with grease under their nails, and no father telling them their name was worth standing up for. He'd teach them engines. He'd teach them the truth wins. He'd teach them to feel when a bolt was tight by feel, not with the clicky thing. They called it the Renata Whitmore program. Clara suggested the name, and when she did, Andre had to leave the room for a few minutes, and when he came back, his eyes were red, and he just nodded once and said, "Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right." The first class had 6 kids. Within 2 years, it had 60. The little shop with the hand-painted Carter sign became the birthplace of something nobody in that forgotten zip code could have imagined: a pipeline of young engineers who'd been told their whole lives they were nothing, learning from the living proof that the world was wrong about people like them all the time. Andre and Clara married the following spring in the small church down the block from the shop, with Caleb as best man, and Lila as everything else, flower girl, ring bearer, and self-appointed director of the entire ceremony. Dr. Anand came. Half the neighborhood came. The chairman of the Valen board came, an old man crying openly in a back pew for the wrong he'd helped do and the rightness of watching it healed. Mrs. Delacroix, who paid in preserves, brought 40 jars. Clara never once asked Andre to leave his world for hers. She moved into his. She kept running Valen. She was good at it, now hardened and clarified by everything she'd learned in a garage. But she ran it from a house in Asheville 3 hours from headquarters, and the board learned to come to her, and nobody ever again mistook the young CEO for someone they could push around, because she'd stood in a glass room and watched a quiet truth destroy the most powerful man in the company, and she'd never forget how it was done. 1 year to the week after a delivery driver dumped 8 engines on a poor man's floor and called them junk. Valen returned to international racing. The car ran a redesigned powertrain built on Andre's original architecture, refined by Andre's own hand, and by the first graduates of the Renata Whitmore program. And it carried on its side a number. Not a sponsor's number. Not a lucky number. The number 3. Andre had asked for it, and Clara had made it happen, and nobody outside the family fully understood why. And that was fine, because it wasn't for them. Andre stood in the pit lane at the final race of the season with Lila on one side and Clara on the other, and they watched the car, his design, his number, come down the final straight in the lead and cross the line first. The crowd roared for the company's comeback. The commentators talked about Valen's return to glory. Cameras flashed, champagne sprayed, and in the middle of all of it, Andre Whitmore stood quiet, holding his daughter's hand, and he was not thinking about the race. "Dad," Lila said, looking up at him over the noise. "We won." Andre looked down at his daughter, 12, now taller, already testing into programs that would have been closed to her father at her age. Already carrying herself like someone who knew her name was worth standing up for, because she'd watched her daddy stand up for his. "No baby," he said. He crouched down to her level, the way he always had, the way he always would. "The car won today, but you and me. We won a long time ago. We won the morning I decided I wasn't going to teach you that being thrown away means you're worthless. We won every day I got to walk you to school. We won the second I looked at those rusty engines and knew exactly what they were worth when the whole world thought they were garbage." He put his scarred hand against her cheek. "The trophy's just the part everybody else gets to see. The winning happened in a broke-down garage where nobody was watching but us." Lila threw her arms around his neck and over her shoulder, Andre found Clara's eyes, and Clara, CEO, wife, the woman who'd walked into his shop, certain she was better than him, and walked out, understanding she had everything to learn. Clara smiled at him through her tears and mouthed the words, "She's right, we won." The delivery driver had been wrong that cold Monday morning. He'd looked at 8 rusted engines and a black man in a poor part of town, and he'd seen worthless things in a worthless place, and he'd laughed, and he'd driven away, and he'd never once imagined that he was delivering a man's whole life back into his own hands. Because the world does that. The world throws away what it doesn't understand. It looks at a struggling single father, at a forgotten neighborhood, at a quiet man who turns a wrench, and it decides it already knows the whole story. It tosses the treasure out with the trash and never learns the difference. But every so often, just often enough to keep the truth alive, the thing that gets thrown away lands in the hands of the one person who knows exactly what it's worth. And that person, patient and unbroken and sure, picks it up and wipes away the dust and shows the whole loud, careless, arrogant world what it was too blind to see. Andre Whitmore had been thrown away once. He had been called worthless, erased, forgotten, and left for scrap in a garage the world had given up on. And he had turned out to be the most valuable thing Vallon Automotive ever built. The world tried to throw him away. The world was wrong. And in the end, the truth he'd carried quietly for 11 years. The truth no lie could outlast, no thief could steal, and no closed door could keep buried forever. Roared across a finish line for everyone to hear, and it never ever changed, ever.